The rain started around 0600 that morning, slow at first, then steady enough to drown the sound of boots on gravel. I didn't mind the quiet. I'd spent years learning how to live inside it. After 12 years in the Army, 10 of them in combat engineering, I'd gotten used to the kind of silence that lives between detonations, between orders, between the last radio call and the next. That silence, it follows you home. I bought a small piece of land outside Ashford, a forgotten town 3 hours south of Fort Bragg. I built a cabin with my own hands. No electricity, no plumbing. Just me, my dog Ranger, and the woods. I wasn't running from anyone. I just wanted peace. But peace, I learned, isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes, it's taken away. It started with a sound I hadn't heard since deployment. The pop of controlled charges. The new company in town, Langford Construction, was blasting limestone across the valley, close enough to shake my walls. The land had been Army property once, part of a decommissioned training range. I knew that ground better than anyone. I'd surveyed it before the withdrawal in 2013. I also knew there were still unexploded munitions buried beneath those ridges. I went down to the site that afternoon. No badge, no authority, just a man with a memory and a warning. The foreman, a slick-talking guy named Brent Keller, didn't like being told what to do by some washed-up vet with too much free time. I kept my tone low, explained the coordinates, even showed him the range clearance map from my old files. He laughed it off. "Relax, soldier," he said. "We've got this under control." But he didn't. 2 days later, one of his workers lost a leg to a buried anti-tank mine, the kind we were supposed to have cleared a decade ago. I didn't sleep that night. The echoes came back, the smell of cordite, the sound of panic over comms. I'd done my part, I thought. I'd warned them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. By the next morning, news crews had arrived. Langford Construction blamed inaccurate decommissioning records. The county blamed me for trespassing and interference. They said I'd tampered with the area and spread false information. I didn't respond. Not to the reporters, not to the sheriff, not even to the letters that arrived 3 weeks later. Legal notices accusing me of obstructing a federal project. I stayed silent. But silence, in towns like Ashford, looks a lot like guilt. One night, as the wind howled through the trees, I found the first of them. Someone had nailed a note to my cabin door. "We know what you did." I stood there for a long time, reading the words in the beam of my flashlight. Then I folded the note, set it in the stove, and watched it burn. But I couldn't burn what came next. The county sheriff, Reynolds, a man I'd known since high school, came to see me 2 days later. His voice was polite, but his eyes weren't. "They're saying you planted that mine, Jack." I didn't answer. "You know how it looks," he said quietly. "You warned them, then it goes off. Folks think you wanted to make a point." He waited. I didn't move. Finally, he sighed. "You always were a stubborn bastard." After he left, I sat at the table, the same one I'd built from old ammunition crates. My hands trembled once, just once, and then went still again. They thought I'd done it, but I hadn't. Still, the damage was done. Stores stopped selling to me. Neighbors looked the other way when I passed. My truck got keyed outside the hardware store. Someone spray-painted "murderer" on my gate. But the worst part wasn't the hate. It was how easy it was for them to believe it. I had been quiet too long. That night, I took out the old footlocker I hadn't opened in years. Inside, my service patches, a few medals, and the hard drive I'd kept from the demolition unit's field recorder. I hadn't watched those files since Afghanistan. But maybe, just maybe, they'd tell me something I'd missed about this land. Something that could prove what I knew was true. As the rain picked up again, I powered up my old laptop and opened the first file. The coordinates flashed on the screen, exactly where the explosion had happened 2 days ago. But there was something else. An entry I didn't remember making. Test detonation order. It read, "Authorized by Langford Engineering, approved at county level." I leaned closer. The timestamp was recent. Too recent. Someone had forged a clearance under my name. My heart slowed. The silence changed. It wasn't peace anymore. It was focus. They wanted to see what I'd done. Fine. I'd show them what I hadn't. But I still didn't know just how deep this went. The next morning I drove into town. I didn't shave. Didn't change. Didn't even look in the mirror. The diner went silent the moment I walked in. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died like someone had cut power. "Morning, Jack," said the waitress. Martha, the only one who still used my name. I nodded, sat in the corner booth, and ordered black coffee. My hands stayed still, but my mind was running the old drills. Observe, record, react. Through the window, I saw Keller's truck pull up across the street. The foreman climbed out, wearing his bright orange vest, talking big and laughing louder. A few men shook his hand. I noticed the county commissioner among them. That's when I understood. This wasn't about the accident. It was about money. Ashford's limestone was worth millions. They needed my land clear, my name ruined, and my silence permanent. Later that day, Sheriff Reynolds called me in for questioning. I went willingly. I knew better than to run. Inside the small interrogation room, the air smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. On the table lay a file marked Incident 231A, Unauthorized Detonation, Subject Jack Mercer. He didn't meet my eyes. "We found traces of C4 residue on your property, Jack." "That's not mine." "Then why's your name on a clearance form filed 3 days before the blast?" "Because someone put it there." He hesitated, then slid a photo across the table. It showed the same coordinates from my file, my initials stamped digitally at the bottom. "Looks official enough to me," he said quietly. I took a breath. "You and I both know how clearance forms are logged. They need 3 digital verifications: operator, supervisor, and command. You're telling me I had all 3? Reynolds shifted. "That's what it says." "It's a lie." He didn't reply. He thought I'd done it too. When I left the station, the reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed. Questions flew like shrapnel. "Did you plant the mine, Mr. Mercer? Are you angry at Langford Construction? Is this revenge for your discharge?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking. But silence, once again, was taken as guilt. By the end of the week, I'd lost what little I had left. My truck was impounded, pending investigation. My land was marked under review for public safety. Even Ranger, my dog, had been taken by animal control after a noise complaint. The world I'd tried to escape had turned on me. Then came the first piece of real evidence. Weak, but something. Martha called me one evening. "Jack," she whispered, "one of the construction guys came in drunk last night. Said Keller had them bury a shipment of C4 that went missing from Fort Gillem. Said they filed it as spent material disposal." I sat up. "You're sure?" She hesitated. "He said Keller used your old clearance codes. That's how he got access." It was possible. During my service, I'd signed dozens of demolition orders. My credentials had been cloned once before, during a supply audit. It could happen again. That was proof number 1, fragile, verbal, but enough to give me a direction. I drove out to the site under cover of night. The guards had thinned since the explosion. I found the old field markers, white stakes half buried in mud. Using my flashlight, I checked the serial numbers on the remains of the detonators. They weren't military issue. They were surplus, sold legally, but only to certified contractors. Langford had access to those. As I crouched there, a beam of light cut through the fog. "Hands up, Jack." It was Keller. He looked relaxed, almost amused, holding a flashlight in one hand and a pistol in the other. "You really should have stayed quiet," he said. My pulse slowed. "You forged my name." He smiled. "I made you relevant again. You're welcome." The silence between us stretched, heavy and alive. He leaned closer. "You'll never prove a thing. And by the time anyone cares, this valley will be leveled." Then he walked away. I stood in the dark long after he'd gone, the mud clinging to my boots, the distant rumble of machines echoing across the hills. Peace was gone. Now it was about truth. And truth doesn't die quietly. The next 48 hours became a mission. Not revenge, just verification. First, I went through every file I had from my last deployment. Engineering reports, clearance forms, demolition logs. Most of it was routine, but one pattern stood out. Langford Engineering had been subcontracted by the same Army division I'd served under in Kandahar. Same project lead, same encryption style. That meant one thing. Their system still used the old digital clearance matrix. If I could get inside, I could prove the forgery. To do that, I needed access. So I went to the only person left who might still trust me. Captain Sarah Hill, now retired, who'd served as my commanding officer in the 33rd Combat Engineer Battalion. She lived 2 towns over. When she opened the door, her face softened. Jack Mercer. Haven't heard that name in a long time. I need your help, ma'am. She listened as I explained everything. The explosion, the forgery, Keller's threat. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she poured 2 cups of black coffee. You still have your old service ID? She asked. I nodded. She led me to her home office and booted up a secure drive. These systems were sloppy back then, she said. If they cloned your credentials, the metadata will show duplicate encryption timestamps. That's your proof. It took hours, but we found it. Proof number 2. 2 clearance files with my signature and identical timestamps created 8 minutes apart. One originated from my last deployment log in Afghanistan, the other from a terminal in Ashford County, dated 3 days before the explosion. Someone had copied my old credentials, reused the encryption key, and filed the fake authorization. Sarah leaned back. That's enough to raise hell, Jack. Not yet, I said. I need one more thing. That came the next morning. I visited the site again, this time in daylight, wearing a high-vis vest I'd borrowed from Sarah. I blended in with the crews. They thought I was one of the new safety inspectors. In the debris, I found what I was looking for. A piece of a detonator casing stamped with a serial number. I wiped the mud away, read the engraving, and froze. It wasn't surplus. It was Army issue. Proof number 3. The kind that couldn't be denied. Whoever supplied Langford had access to active military stockpiles. That meant corruption went higher than Keller. That night I compiled everything, video logs, encryption data, serial numbers, and sent it to an old contact in the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. No message, no plea, just the evidence. Then I waited. Days passed. The town grew quieter, colder. Rumors shifted, from Jack planted the mine to Jack's onto something. People didn't speak as loud when I walked by. Then, one morning at 0700, 3 black SUVs rolled into Ashford. Federal vehicles. No insignia. Just authority. They went straight to the Langford site. By noon, the entire operation was shut down. Keller was escorted out in handcuffs. But I didn't celebrate. I just stood on my porch, watching the clouds move over the hills. That evening, Sheriff Reynolds drove up my road again. He didn't come in. He just handed me a sealed envelope. From the feds, he said. Inside was a single document, an official statement clearing me of all suspicion. Below it, in small print, it read, Federal investigation opened. Procurement fraud, forgery, and unauthorized explosives use. I looked up at Reynolds. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally he said, Guess you were right all along. I nodded. He hesitated, then added quietly, They'll probably want a statement. Not from me, I said. He frowned. You deserve credit, Jack. I shook my head. I just wanted peace. He sighed, tipped his hat, and left. But peace wasn't what I got. Respect was coming, but not the way I expected. 2 weeks later, they called a town hearing. Officially, it was about community restoration. Unofficially, it was about me. The courthouse was full, press, locals, county officials. Keller wasn't there. He was under federal custody. But his partners were. So was the commissioner. I walked in wearing my old field jacket. No medals, no uniform, just the man they thought they knew. When the moderator opened the floor, I didn't rush to speak. I waited until the crowd quieted. Then I placed 3 folders on the table. Proof, I said simply. The first folder contained the clearance logs, side by side, same encryption, duplicate timestamps. The second held the detonator serial photo, traced back to an Army depot 2 states away. The third showed Keller's authorization request to the county, signed with my digital ID. This is how they did it, I said. They needed my name to make it look clean. They used my past to hide their crime. No one moved. No one spoke. Then I turned to the commissioner. You signed the funding release. His face drained of color. I didn't know. You did, I said calmly, because your initials are right here, on the shipment manifest. He started to stammer something, but the federal agent beside him stood up and placed a hand on his shoulder. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that accuses. The kind that respects. Everything that had been said about me, the whispers, the hate, the threats, hung in that stillness, exposed. When it was over, I left before anyone could speak to me. Outside, the sky was turning orange. The air smelled like wet stone and dust. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not happy, just lighter. The next day, the headlines read, "Veteran clears name in explosive scandal. Langford construction under federal investigation." Martha stopped by with coffee. "They're calling you a hero now," she said softly. I smiled faintly. That's their word, not mine. Because heroes chase glory. I'd only chase the truth. And when truth finally stands, it doesn't need to shout. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the valley where the explosions once echoed. The construction site was gone, reclaimed by silence. I rebuilt the fence, replaced the gate, and brought Ranger back home. He limped a little, probably from his time at the shelter, but still followed me everywhere. People in town had started waving again. Some stopped to apologize. Others just nodded. I didn't hold it against them. They saw what they wanted to see. Until they couldn't. One morning I found a letter on my porch. No return address. Inside was a simple line. "Thank you for not letting them bury what mattered." I didn't know who sent it. Maybe one of Keller's men. Maybe someone from the county. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. Peace had returned. Not loud, not triumphant. Just quietly present, like the hum after a storm. Sometimes I sit on the porch at dusk watching the sun fall behind the ridges we once trained to destroy. I think about all the noise that filled my life. The wars, the rumors, the lies, and how it took silence to end them. They respect me now. But that was never what I wanted. All I ever wanted was peace. And sometimes, peace only comes after they see what you've done. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but for the truth that refuses to stay buried. The valley is quiet now, but I can still hear the echoes of that day, faint and distant, like a warning carried on the wind. And every time I hear it, I remind myself, some wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end when the truth is finally recognized.